We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and...
For decades, one final piece of Diana's private story had remained untouched, sealed away from the arguments, grief, and power struggles that followed her death. Then Princess Anne did what no one expected. In a private royal meeting, she unsealed a document containing Diana's final personal wish concerning William. And as the words were read aloud, the future king did not argue, question, or move. He simply sat there, completely speechless. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne had carried the burden quietly. According to a documented private account prepared after the meeting, she had been entrusted with the sealed paper because Diana wanted it kept outside ordinary palace circulation. A private final wish document, in simple terms, was a personal written instruction meant to be opened only under specific conditions. This one was never ordinary paperwork. Its words were meant for William alone, protected from advisors who might reshape their meaning for all those years. William had entered expecting an administrative matter. The moment Anne said Diana's name, his posture changed. He gripped the edge of his chair and said nothing. The prince had spent years learning to carry his mother's memory without letting grief control him. But this was different. This was Diana addressing the man he had become. Anne broke the seal herself. She opened the pages, placed them between them, and began reading. The first lines made clear that Diana had written for a future moment when William would carry responsibilities heavy enough to separate him from himself. The crown, meaning the duties and authority tied to the monarchy rather than the physical object, stood at the center of that fear. Diana was not warning him against service. She was warning him against becoming trapped by it. William reached toward the page. His hand stopped halfway, then slowly pulled back. Anne watched, because she knew the hardest words had not yet been spoken. A recorded recollection of the private exchange described her pause as deliberate. Diana's final wish contained affection, but also a direct request about duty, family, and the life William would build around his own children. Then William finally looked up. Anne did not soften what came next. She told him there was a reason the document had remained sealed for so long, and that reason led back to one private incident the palace had never forgotten. William's silence suddenly meant more than shock. The past had opened a door he could no longer close, and to understand why, he first had to face the people who had lived inside Diana's shadow ever since. William had spent most of his adult life learning how to carry Diana's memory without allowing it to control him. Anne had spent those same years watching the monarchy absorb one crisis after another, while rarely speaking about the wounds underneath. Now those two worlds had collided. The sealed message had placed Diana between them once again. Not as a photograph, not as history, but as a mother whose final words demanded something from her son. William understood why the moment cut so deeply. As Diana's eldest son and the future king, he carried two lives at once: the private life of a son who had lost his mother, and the public life of a man being prepared for the highest role in the monarchy. The future king, in simple terms, meant the person expected to inherit the throne and eventually become sovereign. That responsibility had shaped nearly every major decision around him. But Diana's message suddenly reminded him of the boy who existed before duty became unavoidable. Anne watched him carefully. She had always been known inside the family for discipline, restraint, and loyalty to the institution. Yet she also understood that some things could not be reduced to protocol. For years, she had protected the sealed material because Diana had trusted that its meaning would survive only if no one softened it, interpreted it, or turned it into palace strategy. Now that protection carried its own cost. Anne knew opening the pages could change how William viewed choices made after his mother's death. William felt the conflict growing inside him. Part of him wanted every word immediately. Another part feared that hearing more would reopen a kind of grief he had spent decades learning to control. He had built a family, accepted greater responsibility, and learned how to speak about Diana without breaking beneath the memory. Yet the document made all of that distance disappear in seconds. Anne finally explained, according to a documented private account of their conversation, that Diana had never intended the wish for the entire royal family. William was named as the main recipient. More troubling, the message referred to another royal whose actions had helped convince Diana that something needed to be written down before it was too late. William noticed the change in Anne immediately. Her words became slower. Her answers became more careful. That hesitation told him the document had not remained sealed because of timing alone. Family tension had helped keep it closed. William walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand resting against it. He turned back and looked directly at Anne. What happened that made her write this? Anne did not answer quickly. When she finally spoke, she pointed him toward one specific night years earlier. A private royal discussion that Diana had left deeply shaken. And to understand her final request, William would now have to confront the moment that convinced his mother her voice needed to survive. The document had not been written in a moment of vague anxiety. It had a beginning. One private confrontation had convinced Diana that certain decisions about William's future might someday be made without him understanding what she truly wanted. Years later, Anne would identify that confrontation as the point of no return. A night when Diana left a tense family discussion, returned to her private rooms, and began composing the message William had just heard. Diana had been growing increasingly uneasy about how her eldest son would be prepared for the crown. The crown, in this context, meant the network of duties, expectations, and responsibilities surrounding a future monarch, not simply the physical symbol worn at a coronation. She understood that William would need discipline and guidance. What frightened her was the belief that emotional distance could slowly be presented as strength, until the boy she knew was surrounded by people who understood royal duty better than they understood him. Anne remembered the night clearly. According to a documented account of their later private conversation, a closed family discussion at Kensington Palace had focused on William's future royal preparation. During that meeting, Diana learned of a proposal that would sharply reduce her involvement in several important decisions affecting him. The plan was presented as practical. She heard something else. To her, it suggested that motherhood could be pushed aside whenever royal preparation became inconvenient. Diana left the discussion shaken. She did not object because she wanted William protected from responsibility. She objected because she feared responsibility without emotional grounding could harden him. The future king would one day face advisors, ceremonies, constitutional expectations, and endless pressure to place institution before instinct. She feared that if this training began by weakening his connection to family, he might eventually believe personal sacrifice was simply the price of being royal. Anne encountered her privately soon afterward. Diana asked a question that stayed with her for years. Did duty always require a person to surrender part of themselves? Anne did not give her an easy answer. She understood the monarchy demanded sacrifice, yet she could also hear the fear beneath Diana's words. This was not rebellion for its own sake. It was a mother trying to protect something she believed the system could not measure. Diana returned to her private rooms that night and began writing. She completed the final page, set down her pen, folded the message herself, and later told Anne that William must hear it one day without anyone translating its meaning for him. The document was to remain sealed until he carried enough responsibility that her warning could no longer be dismissed as maternal emotion. Anne then told William the part that mattered most. His mother had left one instruction more difficult than all the others. When royal expectation and loyalty to his own family finally collided, he would have to choose. Now that moment no longer felt distant, and William wanted to know exactly what Diana believed he might someday have to resist. William did not leave after hearing the backstory. He closed the door instead. The grief that had frozen him moments earlier was giving way to something sharper. If Diana believed her son would one day face a choice between royal expectation and personal loyalty, then William needed to know what she had feared, and why Anne had waited until now. For the first time that evening, aunt and nephew stopped speaking carefully. William challenged her directly. He had married, become a father, and stepped deeper into senior royal responsibility, while this message remained hidden. Senior royal responsibility, in simple terms, meant taking on greater duties connected to the future leadership of the monarchy. He could understand caution, but not silence without explanation. To him, the years now felt different. Every major choice he had made suddenly seemed to exist beside words from his mother that he had never been allowed to hear. Anne did not retreat. According to a documented private account of the exchange, she reminded him that Diana had placed clear conditions on the document. It could only be opened when William had enough independence and authority to act on its meaning without being controlled by advisors or overwhelmed by grief. Anne told him that protecting the message had never been about keeping Diana from him. It had been about making sure the wounded son did not hear something intended for the adult man. William's frustration sharpened. He told Anne that protection could become another form of denial. By keeping the message sealed, she had also kept part of his mother beyond his reach. He had spent years wondering what Diana might have wanted for him, and now he was learning that some of those answers had existed all along. Anne heard the pain in his voice, but she refused to apologize for honoring the conditions Diana herself had set. William finally asked her to read the central passage aloud. Anne unfolded the page and spoke slowly. Diana's wish was direct. He must never allow the crown to become more important than protecting the emotional security and unity of his own children. Succession, meaning the order in which members of the royal family inherit the throne, could never become an excuse for emotional distance. Titles, hierarchy, advisors, and tradition were not to come between him and the family closest to him. William stood across the table from Anne. The words had struck somewhere deeper than anger now. "Did she believe this would happen to me?" he asked. Anne met his eyes. She believed it could. That answer changed everything. William immediately thought of one live discussion already moving quietly through royal circles: how Prince George should be prepared for the future waiting for him. Diana's words were no longer history. They had just entered a decision the palace was already preparing to make. The timing of Anne's revelation suddenly became impossible to ignore. Behind palace doors, discussions were already underway about how George's future responsibilities should gradually be separated from ordinary family life. To courtiers, it was preparation. To William, after reading Diana's message, it sounded disturbingly familiar. His mother had feared exactly this, that the machinery surrounding an heir could begin making emotional distance look necessary long before anyone recognized the cost. William understood the logic because he had lived through versions of it himself. Senior royal planning meant the long-term process of preparing an heir for public duty, constitutional responsibility, and the pressure of eventually carrying the monarchy forward. For George, that planning included more formal instruction, tighter schedules, and gradual exposure to responsibilities far beyond those of an ordinary child. None of it sounded cruel on paper. That was exactly what troubled William. The danger Diana had described did not begin with cruelty. It began with reasonable decisions that slowly became normal. William could feel the old pattern closing around him. If he accepted every traditional expectation without challenge, would he be protecting George or simply repeating what had been done before? He knew his son would need discipline, He knew duty could not be avoided. But after hearing Diana's warning, he could no longer pretend that preparation and emotional distance were the same thing. Catherine found him alone later, reading the same passage again. She did not interrupt immediately. When William finally looked up, he admitted that the document had forced him to ask where royal preparation ended and childhood began. Catherine understood why the question mattered. George was not only an heir, he was their son, still growing, still learning who he was, before the institution could tell him who he must become. Anne's earlier words returned with even greater force. According to a documented account of their private exchange, Diana had once used a phrase that she wanted William to remember: protect his ordinary heart. She meant that if he ever became both heir and father, he should never allow royal expectations to erase the human part of his child. William folded the document slowly. He now understood something crucial. Diana had not given him a constitutional command. A constitutional command, in simple terms, would carry formal legal or institutional authority. Her message had none of that. Its power was moral, which meant no advisor, lawyer, or courtier could make the decision for him. Catherine watched as he finally spoke. George would be prepared for duty, William said, but never at the cost of becoming a stranger inside his own family. The next morning, that private promise would become a decision the royal household could no longer ignore. By morning, William was no longer speechless. He was certain. A scheduled discussion about George's long-term royal preparation began as expected, but it did not end that way. William listened, allowed the recommendations to be placed before him, then calmly stopped the process. Diana's document never left his possession. He did not use it as an excuse. He used it as a reminder, and made clear that his son's childhood would not be negotiated away. William knew George would one day carry responsibilities few children could understand. Formal royal preparation meant the structured process of introducing an heir to public duty, constitutional expectations, and the discipline required for future service. The prince did not reject that reality. He rejected the idea that preparation had to come by slowly separating his son from ordinary family life. George would learn duty, he insisted, but he would also be allowed to remain a child while there was still time to be one. William listened until the final recommendation was presented. Then he closed the folder and pushed it gently back across the table. Several advisors were stunned, because much of the plan had already been treated as settled. The future king did not raise his voice. He simply said George would learn what service meant, without ever being taught that love and duty had to compete. The room fell quiet, because everyone understood this was not a minor adjustment. William had drawn a line. Charles received the amended recommendation privately soon afterward. He read it slowly, set it down, and remained silent. According to a documented account of their later conversation, the king understood almost immediately that something deeper had changed in his son. William did not reveal every line Diana had written, but he told his father that the message had forced him to recognize a pattern he refused to reproduce. Charles absorbed that carefully. The monarch understood the institutional consequence at once. Diana's private wish had now influenced how not only William, but also George, might be prepared for the crown. Something written as a mother's warning had crossed generations and entered the future of the monarchy itself. Yet the king also understood the pain beneath his son's decision. William was not rejecting service. He was trying to prevent service from costing his children what he believed it had once cost him. William left the conversation without triumph. The decision had been made, but the emotional weight remained. Later that day, he contacted Anne and asked to meet again. This time, he wanted no secretaries, no folders, no palace procedure, and no interpretation. He had stopped the plan. Now he needed one final answer from the woman who had carried Diana's words all those years. An answer no committee, advisor, or royal rule could give him. There were no aides this time, no sealed folders, no formal agenda. William and Anne met as aunt and nephew, and the question he carried into that room had nothing to do with succession. He wanted to know whether Diana had truly believed the adult William would understand her final wish, or whether the document had been written simply because a frightened mother needed to say something she might never get another chance to say. William admitted the message had affected him more deeply than he expected. He had spent years separating the public memory of Diana from the private memory of his mother, but those two worlds had suddenly become impossible to keep apart. Succession, in simple terms, meant the order determining who inherits the throne. Yet that question now felt almost irrelevant. What troubled him was far more personal. Diana had written to the man he would become, but William still heard the voice of the mother he had lost. Anne listened without interrupting. According to a documented private account of their conversation, she explained that Diana had never been trying to control his future from beyond the grave. She wanted him to remember what power could quietly remove if no one challenged it. Duty could take time. Tradition could take freedom. Expectation could slowly convince someone that emotional distance was maturity. Diana feared not that William would become weak, but that he might become so strong in public that he stopped noticing what was disappearing in private. William confessed something harder. Part of him felt guilty for needing a document to remind him of lessons Diana had already tried to teach him while she was alive. He wondered whether he should have understood sooner. Anne rejected that thought immediately. She told him Diana had never expected perfection. Her fear was not that her son would fail. It was that royal life might teach him to mistake suffering for virtue and emotional sacrifice for noble duty. Anne then revealed what she had deliberately kept back. A recorded recollection of the exchange described her voice lowering before she repeated Diana's final handwritten line, "Choose love before they teach you to call its absence duty." William looked down. The words changed the meaning of everything that had come before. This was not really about monarchy. It was about breaking an emotional pattern before it reached George, Charlotte, and Louis. His children would know responsibility, but they would also know that love was not something to surrender in order to deserve it. Anne reached across the table and placed her hand over his for only a moment. William remained silent, then finally said, "I understand now." He decided Diana's exact words would stay within the family, but the principle behind them would not stay hidden for long. Within hours, William's decision was being debated far beyond palace walls. The public never saw Diana's document. They did not hear Anne read its final line or watch William struggle to answer. What they saw instead was the consequence: a future king drawing an unmistakable boundary around his children. That alone was enough to ignite extraordinary attention. Commentators searched for explanations, newspapers revisited Diana's influence, and outside Windsor, a simple reaction from ordinary people captured what the palace itself could never comfortably say. William's decision soon became impossible to hide. Palace communications confirmed that he had personally adjusted plans concerning the pace and nature of George's future royal preparation. Palace communications, in simple terms, meant the official messages released or approved by the royal household. The statement avoided private details, but the meaning was clear. The prince had stepped in, and the earlier plan would not move forward unchanged. That mattered, because decisions around an heir were rarely altered so openly once preparation had already begun. William kept Diana's exact words out of the announcement. He understood that the moment her private message became public, it risked turning into royal policy, political argument, or something people would use against one another. The document had been written by a mother to her son. He refused to let it become anything else. Public reactions split almost immediately. Some commentators praised the decision as a necessary break from rigid tradition, arguing that George could be prepared for responsibility without losing ordinary family life. Others questioned whether emotional concerns should influence the training of a future monarch. William watched the debate quietly. He did not issue another statement, and he did not defend himself. Catherine saw the pressure building. According to a documented private account of their conversation, she turned off the television while William remained near the window, listening to another panel debate what his choice meant. She reminded him that protecting their children did not require winning every argument in public. William agreed. He had already decided that George's well-being mattered more than appearing untouched by criticism. Broadcasters soon connected the change to Diana's determination to give her sons experiences outside rigid royal structures. That connection intensified speculation. Then one image captured the mood more powerfully than hours of commentary. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered beside the gates as a newspaper front page spread through the group. Diana's son chooses family first. A woman placed white flowers beneath the headline, and photographs of the gesture quickly spread across the country. William watched none of it for long. He turned to Catherine and made his position final. "They weren't written for the country," he said. "They were written for me." And with that choice, he was ready to decide not only what Diana's final wish meant, but where it would belong from that moment forward. The document began as something sealed, hidden, and almost frightening in its power. It ended as something far simpler. A mother, reminding her son who he was before the crown, could tell him who he needed to become. William no longer looked stunned when he held Diana's pages for the final time. The shock had passed. In its place was clarity. Anne had delivered the message she promised to protect, and William had finally answered it through action. William made one decision immediately. Diana's original document would remain private. It would not become part of an official royal statement, be turned into public policy, or be used as a weapon in another palace argument. Formal royal messaging, in simple terms, meant the official words released on behalf of the monarchy. This message had never been written for that purpose. It belonged to a mother and her son, and the prince believed protecting that boundary was part of honoring her. Anne understood that her responsibility had finally ended. According to a documented private account of their final exchange, she had guarded those pages until William reached the point Diana had intended. Old enough, powerful enough, and independent enough to act without anyone deciding their meaning for him. William thanked her not only for protecting the document, but for knowing when protection had become silence. Anne had carried the burden for years. Now she could finally put it down. William returned to Catherine with a different understanding of what his mother had left him. He no longer saw the message as a warning hanging over his future. He saw it as permission. Diana had not told him how to rule Britain. She had told him that becoming king did not require surrendering the part of himself that was husband, father, and son. Catherine understood what that meant immediately. Their children would grow with duty around them, but duty would never be allowed to hollow out the family at the center of their lives. George's preparation would continue. William had never intended otherwise. But childhood, parental closeness, and emotional security would now be treated as essential, not expendable. That was the real consequence of Diana's final wish. It did not change succession. It changed the man who would one day inherit it. William placed the pages back inside their protective envelope himself. He did not reseal them. Instead, he wrote the date they had finally been opened across the outside and handed them back to Anne. Then, he said the words that brought the entire story to its emotional end. "She can rest, I heard her." Diana's last wish had crossed decades to reach her son. And when it finally did, William gave it the only answer that mattered. He chose to protect the family behind the crown, and in doing so, proved that his mother's voice had not been preserved in vain. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.